Hi everybody. So welcome back, and we're at the end of the Easter holidays now, about to launch into the summer term. If you're involved in education, you know that the summer term is all about results and outcomes, trajectories, data, marking and tests. The day-to-day and the week-by-week delivery of every subject has to land really well for the teaching and learning to translate into these all-important positive outcomes. In some ways, teaching is like a lot of other crafts. Practices are honed and polished, and it's a stepwise process using tried and tested techniques, and the pedagogy is built up layer upon layer. And it's robust because it's tracked and it's assessed every single year. The metrics reflect everything from the school context to teaching, learning, leadership and governance of the school. So why would you introduce something new or different into such a carefully nurtured and streamlined system? Well, for me, this is the time of year when I write the progress reports for the schools that did try something new and have had face-to-face delivery of the Rhythm for Reading programme. So this is a post. It's a kind of behind the scenes peek on how I report progress in reading at the end of the programme. And today I thought I'd just talk about the trends in reading scores. These have kind of emerged over the past 12 years as I've collected reading scores before and after the Rhythm for Reading programme. At first, I was actually very perturbed because I could see that the children who went through the programme did not make progress in the same way, even though they'd been doing exactly the same rhythm-based exercises. Interpreting the differences in the children's progress is something I'm probably going to discuss in another post, but today I'm going to focus on the trends that have emerged as the bigger picture, if you will, around the role of rhythm in reading development as it's come into focus. So before we look at the scores, I'm going to show you the assessment that I use. It's the Nil Analysis of Reading Ability Second Edition, otherwise known as NARA 2. It's hugely popular as an assessment. It's been used a lot by the top reading researchers and by many, many teachers up and down the country. It's used internationally. It was first developed in Australia. I first used it in 1999 when I took the Hornsby Diploma in Teaching and Assessing Children with Specific Learning Difficulties. I absolutely loved the course and I passed the diploma. The biggest value of the course for me was really getting to know this reading assessment, the NARA. Straight away, I could see how relatable it was for the children and that it could produce a really detailed reading assessment in a relatively short period of time. I also loved that the children read aloud and would be supported while they read, because you see they are allowed to look at the text when they answer comprehension questions. So a child with a specific learning difficulty is supported in this way. All in all, as far as I was concerned, this was winning on three fronts. The test was child-centred, it was robust, and it was ethical. I used the NARA in my PhD research a few years later, and I've continued to rely on it whenever I evaluate progress in reading following the face-to-face delivery of Rhythm for Reading. There are two parallel forms of the NARA, so I give one form of the assessment before the programme and one at the end. And in this way, there's no risk that the children might remember the passages of text when they have their follow-up assessment. The NARA 2 produces raw scores in accuracy, comprehension and rate of reading, and these can be converted into standardised scores and reading age equivalent scores. These scores show whether the extent of the progress is in line with the child's chronological age and the typical progress that would be expected of a child of that age. I often assess children with English as an additional language and children who have an Education, Health and Care Plan, also known as an EHCP. I find that the NARA can be supplemented by a test of phonological processing. I use the CTOP 2. And I just use it if a child struggles with the first passage of text in the NARA. I'm often asked who selects the children who take part in the programme. Well, they are always selected by their class teachers, because if they're not yet reaching their potential in any aspect of reading or not able to sustain focus in their attention in the class, it's the class teachers who are best able to pinpoint that kind of problem. Some of the children who take part work with teaching assistants who hear them read every single day for a few minutes. The children come out of class just for a little while. It's not as if they're coming out of class for 30 minutes of support as part of a structured program with a specialist teacher trained at master's level, for example. The children who take part are often distracted quite easily. Some of them might be a bit dysregulated, some of them might be a bit spacey or very talkative, others may be very cautious or very quiet. At the end of the Rhythm for Reading programme, there are improvements that are particularly conspicuous in NARA comprehension scores. This has always been the case. I've never seen anything different. All the way back to my PhD, it's always been the comprehension scores that have changed significantly. So the changes in comprehension scores do vary, as I mentioned earlier. And I can now say that there are trends. We can see that the scores actually fall into 3 categories: large changes, medium changes, and small changes. So the large changes are 20 months or more in terms of age equivalent reading score, and that's over a period of 10 weeks. The medium changes are between 6 and 19 months. And the smaller changes are between 0 and 5 months. Over the years, I've wondered very much about which children are the ones who are actually making all this progress. And it seems to me, just purely in terms of what the children say and also the way that they behave during the reading test and during the Rhythm for Reading sessions, that it is the most conscientious children who seem to have the most uneven profile when they start, but they make the most progress in their comprehension scores. They may read a bit more slowly at the end of the programme, and I would say that this is probably because either they've got on to more challenging vocabulary, or it's because they're sort of spending a little bit more time assimilating and monitoring the text as they go. So I've made a little diagram to show you what this looks like on a sort of column chart. So there we are. I hope you can see. A is for accuracy, C is for comprehension, and R is for rate. So first of all, here, these are the baseline scores. And here you can see the follow-up scores. The dotted line is their chronological age. It's kind of hypothetical, but this is basically quite typical of what these outcomes look like at the end of the Rhythm for Reading programme for those children. So now let's move on to the next category. The most relaxed children in the group have the same kind of shape in their reading profile at the baseline level. However, for these children, the difference between accuracy, comprehension, and rate is not so pronounced. So in other words, whereas group 1, category 1, we saw a kind of spiky profile with a really pronounced dip for comprehension. In category 2, those who make medium gains in reading comprehension, we see a much flatter profile, and I'll show you that in a moment. Often these children read relatively fast, so we can see that they have a high score for their rate of reading. Okay, so at the end of the programme, they're much more likely to have an even flatter profile at the end. So here we are, this is what this looks like. So again, we've got accuracy, comprehension, and rate for the baseline here and the follow-up here. Here you can see that we've got the lower score for comprehension, and you can see that it's increased here. At the follow-up test, you may have noticed that the profile was relatively flat and consistent for the first category, and it's the same for this second category of scores as well. It's quite flat here. The overall profile is much, much less uneven in this group than it was in the first group. The third category of scores includes the children who are more idiosyncratic and individual in their approach. So it's more difficult for me to say this is what the scores will look like. They all tend to be a little bit different. So sometimes you'll have higher accuracy, lower rate, and sometimes you'll have lower accuracy and higher rate, with comprehension in the middle usually low. On occasion, if we have a child who has dyslexia, they are able to understand what they're reading really, really well, although they're making frequent accuracy errors and they may be stopping and starting a lot and therefore reading more slowly. So I would say that these categories are not sort of cut and dried, but they are general trends. So the outcome at the end of Rhythm for Reading for the third category is usually that these children want to read faster. That is their priority. It's to show that they've got, you know, some speed going on. So here we are. This is what that can look like. So this is the baseline. You can see they're reading really, really fast. This is the follow-up. There's a little bit of a change in their reading comprehension sometimes, like a few months, not very much. And it varies as well between 0 and 5 months. It's not something that you can kind of confidently predict. So that is the third category. But there's a little bit of a spin on that, which I'll tell you about shortly. The interesting thing is that in the Rhythm for Reading sessions, we are working with rhythmic patterns rather than letters, words and sentences. As many people are already aware, rhythm has an effect on the nervous system, and children often say that they felt happier and calmer and more peaceful during the sessions and after the sessions. So those are the words that the children use to describe how the program made them feel. There's been a lot of research on the use of calming music to support studying, but actually the original music written for the Rhythm for Reading program is not at all calm. We have dolphins, we have dinosaurs, we have marches, we have dances, we have funk, and we have groovy stuff. We have music that sounds like it's out of video games. It's not in any way intended to induce calm, but it's possible that the group activity itself may be helpful in that way for the children. So the next question is, how do these patterns in terms of learning coexist with the traditional methods of teaching? Well, a rhythm-based approach extends and complements the conventional approaches to the teaching of reading, and success leaves clues. To understand why rhythm helps children's reading, we need to really look at the reading scores of the children who were still struggling with phonemic awareness when they were doing the Rhythm for Reading program. The neuroscientist Laurie Cutting of Johns Hopkins University showed that non-linguistic skills such as working memory and executive function contribute to the development of reading skills. Working memory represents our capacity to hold information in mind, and it allows us to assimilate and play with concepts. So, for example, in reading, working memory might hold information about the characters of a story and their intentions, as well as subtle details which could suggest that the plot might move in a certain direction. And before that stage, when children are learning to read, they need to have a sufficiently robust level of development in phonological awareness in order to get their reading off the ground. So there are two logical explanations for persistently low phonological awareness scores after years of excellent teaching in phonics. Firstly, the child may be unable to perceive the sounds of language clearly enough to discern the differences between them. And secondly, if the child is not able to assimilate the sounds of language, this may be due to weak working memory. I often see children with heightened sensitivity to phonemic blending, and they use this to compensate for relatively weak working memory. But if phonemic sensitivity, such as blending, is also weak, then reading development is arrested, and it's very difficult for them to even get to the first passage of text in the Nara. However, at the end of the Rhythm for Reading program, in the follow-up tests, I have seen many children improve in their phonological blending by more than 12 months in their reading age equivalent. Interestingly, elision, which is the other test I use, does not improve in the same way. But for now, I'd like to just show you what the scores look like for phonemic awareness. So here we are. This child is low, a long way below chronological age on elision, and blending. But here in the follow-up test, we've got a similar score for elision. Typically, that is not always the case, though sometimes they improve. And blending has improved by a great deal. Sometimes there are 2 years of progress in blending. I think we could conservatively mention that 1 year is absolutely quite frequently seen. It's a trend, yes. Elision, of course, is more related to working memory capacity and executive functions such as inhibitory control, planning, and cognitive flexibility. And I think this is probably a great topic for another time. But for now, here are some of the things that teachers have said recently about the children who've made unexpectedly good progress. And of course, I've changed the children's names. So Katie's teacher said this: Katie is making fabulous progress and has become much more keen to read and positive about reading. And Katie herself said this: I got on to fluency, which means you are on chapter books. I wanted to be in fluency so much, and now I am finally on fluency. Now, here's another one. Tom's teacher said, Tom has made super progress in reading this term. He is a keen reader now and is much more confident. And Tom said, I can understand what I read now and I can read so fluently. It makes me so happy. So, to conclude, we have covered quite a few points. I've shown you how there are trends in the children's progress in reading at the end of the Rhythm for Reading programme. Consistently over many, many years, I see large, medium and small gains in terms of reading comprehension at the end of the programme. And these trends seem to be aligned with the personalities of the children, particularly in their determination to read, which presumably has previously been thwarted by the missing element, which was rhythm. Teachers always want the children in their class to flourish and to catch up with where they need to be. Teachers go to great lengths to make sure that no child in their class falls behind, but it happens, no matter how carefully the child is taught. I've got a webinar coming up really soon, and if you'd like to find out more about the programme, I'll be discussing how rhythm, as the missing piece in the teaching of reading, can transform learning. I hope to see you there. Bye.